Kwekwe, Pajashig, welcome. Welcome to Indigital Insights. Monique Manatch, Indigenous, Kitikanika and Dojaba. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins at Barrier Lake. And today we get to talk to Rose Stiffarm. Rose is a filmmaker, digital artist from the Siksika, Quw'utsun, Wsanec, Aaniiih, and Nakoda nations, a woman of many nations and many talents. Rose, I'm wondering, can you tell us about yourself? How did you get into becoming an artist?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington, which at least at the
Mm.
time was very um like in Seattle public schools was really heavily funded for the arts at the time. I can't necessarily say the same now, but I would say a big part of that has to do with a lot of the arts funding because as a teen, I was part of, um, well, not just the Seattle Public School, but like within the greater Seattle community, because I was part of a Native youth theater program called Red Eagle Soaring that my parents put me in. And then um, I also became involved with like a Native youth basketball program too. And we're an all Native team. And so I got involved with those from a pretty young age, from when I was a teenager, and then through being involved in those two programs, the Red Eagle Soaring, the youth theater program, was asked to act in some student youth short films, and I agreed, and I came out and acted, and then they asked me at the Q&A if I ever thought about being on the other side of the camera, and I said no, not really, but that sounds like a really cool idea. And so somebody came up to me after and said, hey, we have this youth film program where we go to the outlying reservations of Seattle to teach Native youth how to use film to tell stories. Is that something you'd be interested in? Is that something you'd want to be involved with? And so I said, yeah, that sounds cool. And so that ended up being Native Lens, Longhouse Media. And over the years working with them, I think I started working with them when I was about 15. And so, like they became an organization, and then they asked me to be involved in their board of directors as the youth member. And then eventually, I was also like working with them as a mentor, as like a peer mentor as a teen. And so they taught me how to like use a camera and edit and do different things like regarding filmmaking, so that if any of the youth participants weren't comfortable asking one of the adults, they could ask me for help. And so from a really young age, I was able to see like how like film can impact people's self-esteem in a very positive way. And also around the same time, like when I was in eighth grade at Mercer Middle School in Seattle, there was an after school film program where they gave us a chance to make a short film. And at the time, for Washington state history, in order to like promote yourself to high school, you had to do a Washington state history project. And so um, everyone else was doing those kind of like trifold things or like PowerPoint presentations, and they gave us an option to create a film for our final project. And so my first documentary was in eighth grade, and I made um, like everyone else was doing like and it had to pertain to Washington state history. And so everyone else was doing like Boeing and Starbucks and like that kind of like things relating to Washington state history. And then what I decided to do was look at Native American assimilation through boarding schools in Washington state. And so I was interviewing some people about that. And so it was a really impactful documentary for a first film. And so, um, yeah, and so I've had different exposure to filmmaking through different ways. And I've been really grateful that like there's been so many opportunities out there. And so it's not necessarily something that I had like, so to say, envisioned myself doing so much, as I've always been presented and with really incredible opportunities. And like I just see them and I jump on them. And so now as an adult, I'm trying to be a bit more conscious in my career to try and create other workshops and opportunities for others to learn and like potentially go down the film route themselves. But honestly, if like I feel about filmmaking that everybody should know how to do it. whether or not they want to be a filmmaker or not. I think everyone has a story to tell, whether that's just their family story or their community story or their youth group's story or whatever. Like, there's so many different things that like people can be documenting because over the years, like technology is just getting more and more accessible. There's still a lot of barriers involved for sure, but like considering like how much a camera used to cost, how much it cost to expose to be able to see what you shot, like now it's video, so it's definitely a lot more attainable for a lot more people. But I would say price is still a bit of a barrier for some, and for many. But I think it's cool to work with other people who think of ideas of how we can all be working together to be bringing these different skills and like different things to the community.
It's fabulous that they had those programs available that you were able to get your start, where you were able to get your start. When you're working, what kind of workshops do you do when you're working? You're working with youth, you're working with emerging talent, and what kind of equipment and what kind of, have you ever done like the low tech thing where everybody just grab your phone or, and what kind of stories do you see coming out of these young people?
Well, I've worked with students of all ages, and so I've worked with mostly, I would say, teens from 13 to maybe 20 or 8, like around that age. But also, I've been asked to go into universities or like programs where they're tailored to like adult learners. So they're like 18 to, I've even had students who are in their 50s and 60s. And so they've all told me that the way that I've shared like my lighting demonstrations makes, and like the way that I can talk about lighting, that it um, makes it I can explain it in a way that they understand. And if they're having a hard time getting it the first time I explain it, I try and like re-explain it in a different way using potentially different metaphors even. And I try to understand where people are coming from so that that way I can use a metaphor that might work a bit more for their understanding. And so that's something that people have been really appreciating. But yeah, I've taught workshops where, um, like with Superfly, it was a program we did with Longhouse Media, and we partnered up with the Seattle International Film Festival, and we had um, pooled different cameras and laptops and hard drives from different like filmmakers and like independent production companies and like seek sponsorship so that we could rent the things that we couldn't borrow. And so that was like a very indie way of doing it. And but also was working with the Seattle International Film Festival. We did a small partnership with Red Eagle Soaring, the youth film program or the youth theater program I was involved with as a teen. They asked me to come back and be a part of their workshop that they were doing because they were taking their youth theater participants and training them how to do film. And so that just pulled at my heartstrings, and I was absolutely stoked to be a part of that. And so through that workshop, we were able to use the resources that the Seattle International Film Festival has. And so they let us use their like student lab area, which has I think like 5 or 6 different like desktop computers for editing, and then some smaller like camcorder style cameras, which were really fun to work with. And then um, there was another time. Oh, and then after the workshop, the participants got to see their films on the big screen at the Seattle International Film Festival. So that was a like well at the at their theater space because they own a theater in Seattle, and so they got to see their works that they just made that workshop on the big screen. And then when I was involved with SIF as a teen and we did Superfly, the youth films would screen at the actual Seattle International Film Festival as part of the Indigenous shorts. So that was like a really cool thing for a lot of the youth to see, like something that they had just made that week already like on the big screen. It was a very intensive experience because we'd all meet on a Wednesday and then like group up and like plan our story ideas and shot lists, and then Thursday we would go and shoot it. And then oh wait, no, I'm thinking we start on Thursday and then Friday we'd go and shoot it, and then um like Friday night, we would spend all night editing, and then Saturday it would premiere at the film festival in the eve, like around 4 p.m. or so. And so it was a very quick experience, but we had 50 youth from across the country. And so something I appreciated about Superfly was we tried to make it so that most of the participants were native, and we tried to make it so that of those participants, like a significant portion were from the res, some of them were from the city, some of them were from suburbs. And then we tried to make it so that the people that weren't native were from like everywhere else. So we had like a very diverse group of people all getting to know each other. And so I found that it was a very like nice way to like get people from different backgrounds to like understand each other more. And something that was really cool was we were talking about kind of like even differences between like in Canada and the States, and how even similar we are too in a lot of ways. And so it was really like cross-cultural experience in that way, but also very like native centered in the same way, because most of our mentors were native, but we also had mentors from everywhere else too. And so, and from like youth programs from across the country, and different volunteers who like many were native, and like a lot weren't. And like it was a really like diverse group. And so I don't know, I find such richness in like being able to bring people from so many different backgrounds together so that we can understand each other more, and like celebrate how we're different but also celebrate how we're the same. But oh, there was another workshop I did. It was for university students. They were in a communications program. And so they were non film students, but what they were going to be embarking on was creating their first documentary on their phones. And so what they wanted to do was bring me in so that I could talk to them how they could make their projects look better and it maybe a little bit more cinematic than if they just went and did it on their own accord without any advice on recommendations to amp up their setup a little. And so um and one of the like I would say major assets I've have in my back pocket is having taken the cinematography for film and video program at Capilano University in North Vancouver. And so um it taught me how to like use really big, expensive film gear, but also it taught me what you can do if you don't have that really expensive film gear. Like I had two completely different cinematography teachers. One of them, like they were both union, but what was interesting about them is they both had completely different approaches to how they got into the union. And so one of them, he started going up working his way up through the union as an assistant, like a trainee assistant, and then operator, and then cinematographer and DP. And then the other one, he went to film school, and as soon as he left, he just shot a bunch of different things as director of photography and cinematographer, but really small things, like really small music videos where he's like, I'm getting paid with a hot dog. And so, but eventually people liked what they were seeing, and his projects just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it was really I don't know, refreshing to hear that there's different ways to join, and people are always asking me like what my way of joining the union is, and because it's something that I'd like to do eventually, but also I kind of recognize it's not exactly a whole bunch of native people in there right now. And I know they could use some of that representation, but also I don't know, I'm having a lot of fun working as a freelancer in the independent world as the DOP and cinematographer. And so it's like I'm kind of like leaning a little bit more towards the independent instructor's way, where he's working on projects and they're kind of smaller and they just kind of keep getting a little bit bigger and bigger. And so I don't know, something that was really cool recently is I've been working for this company. Like they do concerts and conferences and conventions and stuff. And so usually I just help them with like wrapping cables and stuff. But um, the Snoop Dogg concert came through town and they forgot to book cam ops. And so I was working the load in, and then it just so happened I was building one of the cameras that would later be following Snoop Dogg that night. And then Next thing you know, that I guess that ended up being my camera I was setting up that night, and they asked me if I would cam op the concert, and so very excitedly I said yes, and then eventually, next thing you know, I'm at the concert, and they're saying, "Hey, camera one, can you just stay on Snoop the whole night?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." And so yeah, that was really awesome. I felt like a kid coming home from the fair afterwards because we got a bunch of cool things from the green room after, and like a poster and a hat and like a bunch of different things. And so but yeah, it was I had coworkers of mine like, "Hey, let me get some of that dopamine, like you you're looking like you're having the best day ever right now." And so it was just I think one of the reasons that the company knew that they could reach out to me was because they're like within the past few months there was an article that came out on the Guardian, and they were interviewing Lily Gladstone about up and comers to look for in Hollywood and who to support and keep an eye out for. And she, this is speaking to the awesomeness of Lily Gladstone, but she gave 42 names of people to look for. And of those 42 names, The Guardian went and interviewed 8 people, and I was one of those people. And so when that article came out, I was sharing it with all my friends and family and coworkers and just my old teachers from CAP. I made sure to email them, and like they were really excited to share that article, and I shared it on LinkedIn. And so but I also shared to that company I've been working with for the concerts because I was like, well, they should know that I'm pretty good at cam mopping. And so like when all their operators were busy or not available for that last minute cam op gig for Snoop, they knew that they could reach out to me. And I kept hearing from the road crew that they were a little disappointed with the last couple stops on the tour. And then when they got to Vancouver, they were saying, "Oh, it's nice to work with cam ops who actually know how to use a camera," and like that kind of thing, and saying like, "Oh, these cam ops make Vancouver look good." And so that was really good, validating information to hear.
Did you say you were building the camera?
Yeah, like you gotta like, because it comes in different pieces. There's like the tripod part, and then like the head you got to put on it, and then usually there's like the body of the camera, and then you got to put the lens on it, and then usually like monitors and different cables to attach the different pieces together. And so um and oh my gosh, that I swear the camera that I used for that concert, it was older than me, which is kind of saying something. But it had some really nice lensing on it. It was like a 9 millimeter to 500 millimeter, so it could go really wide and get really tight up in the shot. And I was on the other end of the stadium, and I could be like basically right up in in the face area of the shot. And so I was like, "That's cool." And but yeah, like takes knowledge to know how to start to build the camera. And like some of my coworkers there, it's like they haven't necessarily gone through the same degree of film school as I have. And so like usually when I'm working with that company, I'm always like, "Oh, hi, I know how to build the camera." But they appreciate the help because usually the person on the road crew, they're used to delegating tasks, but used to like the people they're delegating to only knowing certain things. And so having limited knowledge about certain things. And so um, they always are very appreciative to hear, like, "Oh, you were knowledgeable about cameras." Like, "Oh, okay." And so, so they appreciate the extra hands. And like the person who was visiting, she was saying that we were like, it was one of her easiest camera builds doing that concert because usually it was just her doing it, and she had me and the other camera operator there. And um, she was saying it was the easiest build she's done the whole tour. So I was like, "That's good feedback."
Do you notice, is there a big difference when you're working with a company like that or when you're working with an Indigenous company? Do you find that there's a difference in attitude or process or just in how things get done or stories even?
I'd say there's different things for sure that I notice. Like I've been working for a music festival called Two Rivers Remix, and I've been like using working as a camera operator for their live stream. And so They have usually have 3 operators and, like, a couple robocams going and someone video directing, and so, um, with, Two Rivers Remix, most of the crew is native, and so, I find, like, sometimes I can make, like, jokes that maybe my coworkers at the other job might not get, or, I also find I have a little bit more freedom in terms of what I can wear to work. Because for most of my film work, I'm thoroughly expected to wear black significantly, or like things that aren't like super high contrast in patterns, or like colored, like super colorful, or like just so that if there's any reflections you're not going to see yourself in the reflection. And so because like mirrors and glass and just so many different things, like pieces, even pieces of metal can have some weird reflections or whatever. And if you're wearing something like neon pink on set, it's like gonna, it might cast a weird haze into the room, or I don't know. But um yeah, for the company that I work with doing the concerts and the conventions and conferences and everything, like there's a very particular uniform I'm expected to wear to work. Usually it's like a black shirt, black pants, and even a hard hat and safety vest and safety boots. And so which it can get hot, and then I'm like, "Oh, I wish I could wear shorts today." And so like I can if I'm working outside, but not if I'm working inside. And so that's kind of like a big distinction there, is that I have a bit more latitude in the attire. And like it's like if I'm working at a music festival, there's a lot more freedom in terms of what I can wear because people aren't expecting me to wear all black. And it's like actually it might be more advantageous if I'm wearing something more like this, because it's a lighter color. And like I was just on tour with them. We've done 2 legs of tour right now, and the most recent one we were in like Kamloops for 3 days, and that was really hot. And we were over in like Lillooet and like Hat Creek, and we were up in Linton. And so um, all places that are very hot and unfortunately are kind of at fire risk right now. And so um, but it was like, I think we were one day in Kamloops, someone on our crew brought a temperature gauge to see it was going to be on site for temperature. When I looked at it, it said 44.5 degrees Celsius. And I grew up in the States, so I think in Fahrenheit, and I just know that's too hot. But my friend, my coworker, he said that when he looked at it, it said 55 degrees Celsius, which I converted to Fahrenheit and found out later is 133 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's hot. And so like I remember on that day I wasn't feeling well. And it's like what you're wearing to your work that day is really important. It's like you really got to focus on wearing some lighter colors, looser clothing, and what kind of material it is, like breathable materials, like not polyester or nylon or anything. Like you want to wear cotton or linen, or maybe even bamboo or hemp or something like that will breathe. Yeah, there was one day I did, and I was wearing like these black bike shorts, and the next day I was like, you know what, I'm gonna wear this white dress to work because I don't want to die. But I realized I was taking medicine that makes me a bit more vulnerable to getting sunburn and sun sickness. So there I am, like this West Coast girl, like walking around in Kamloops. And it's funny, we are at a racetrack, and so I'm like, there's a lot of like wind and dust getting kicked up. So I had like a bandana over my nose, and I was trying to keep the dirt out of my hair, because I remember like the first day, like we all went home and showered, and we all like blew our noses and black was coming out, and then we're all just covered in dirt from like head to toe. And so I was trying to keep some of it out of my hair and like off my, like out of my mouth and nose. And so like, and I like trying to protect myself from the sun so I don't overheat. I had like a hat on, and I had an umbrella, and I had scarves draped over me to like keep the sun off my skin. And people were like, "Are you allergic to the sun?" And I was like, "No, I'm just West Coast." I felt like a vampire though. I was like, "It's hot." I had like a spray bottle with me. I kept spraying. And like a lot of the crew, we found those, like they're kind of like neck things, but they have little like beads in them that you, if you dunk it in ice, it can help keep you cool. And so Yeah, we had those on us, and so we had some on our necks and some on our heads, and yeah, it's a new, like, I don't know, growing up in Seattle and living in Vancouver, I'm used to, like, my major battle with the weather being the rain. And so it's always funny with the music festival though, because when it does start raining, a lot of the crews like running and panicking and and then there I am like, do 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 do. I got my umbrella, I got my rain jacket out of my bag and over my camera. Here's my little garbage bag over my camera, and everyone's like running around in panic, and I'm like, I'm good. But yeah, the sun is the new weather system for me to try and navigate.
Exactly, because I mean, you could get heat exhaustion or heat stroke so easily.
Well, it's like you'll see me at my camera, and then I'll have like a huge water bottle, and I just like drink the whole thing. But it's just like 2 minutes later, I'm actually sweating again. So it's like, oh, I needed all that because I sweated all out earlier. And it's like just making sure you're getting like all the electrolytes you need, and getting like the little bit of sugar and salt in your drinks, and like Gatorade or coconut water or whatever available. And yeah. It's like there's certain times where I'm like, you know what? I can't even eat like real food right now. I can only like stomach like fresh fruit because it's just so hot in the day. But it's hydrating too, so that's helpful. But yeah, it's really interesting to see like the different ways that film has allowed me to travel and like see the world. And I don't know, just I remember one time, like, well, I have an iron deficiency, and so I'm reputably not a fan of touch screens because I remember when I was at Standing Rock and trying to like shoot on my iPhone, I'd have to like go like this and like rub my fingers together just to touch the screen to like record or whatever. And so like if it's just a little bit cold, even like in Seattle and Vancouver during the winter, like I can have to do that with my finger before I format a card if it's like something that's touch screen. And I'm just like, oh, this sucks. Like I like buttons on my cameras. That way I can touch them. And sometimes people are like, Rose, format the card. What's taking so long? And I'm like, hold on, I gotta rub my hands together. But it won't engage the screen. It needs, yeah, the touch screen, I get cold hands from having my iron deficiency. And like I try and stay on my iron supplements, but it's I don't know. Sometimes I forget, and that's okay. But yeah, anyways, like it takes a little bit of a moment just to rub them together and rub on the screen. And people are like, "Hurry up, Rose! Format the car. We got to go." I'm like, "Hold on, these touch screens that I keep saying I hate. Hold on." Yeah, I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, I went there. Okay, so when I first got there, it was so hot. I went and jumped in the river, and I was there for 3 months, and I got there in September. And when I left in December, like about mid-December, it was so cold that I remember seeing someone, they were wearing snowshoes and they were just walking across the river. So like it was quite an extreme like temperature change for coming from Seattle and Vancouver. Like I remember some of the weather systems during the winter, they were so cold that I remember there were news reports talking about how it was colder than Antarctica. And I had people messaging me saying things like, "Oh, it's colder than Antarctica down there. Are you all right? Did you wake up? Are you still alive?" And funnily enough, those were the days I'd wake up overheating because our camp was so warm. But like, it was blistering cold out there. Like it was cold. Like I remember one time one of the people I was camping with, he said, "You know, if this fire goes at night, we're dead." And I was like, yeah, so let's make sure it doesn't go out then. And I remember there was one night it almost went out, but I remember waking up and getting the embers going, and um kept it going. But yeah, like that's a very real thing. But I remember like seeing so many different tents and different structures get shredded up by the wind. But I remember seeing that like the most resilient structures that were there were all round because they'd all like if it was a four-sided tent or whatever, it would get shredded up because it just would catch the wind. But I noticed that if it was a teepee or a yurt, or I even seen a hogan there, and like I seen different like round structures. Like I seen a teepee made out of tarps, and I started calling it a tarpie, and like that was also round. But all the round structures, the wind would blow around it, and it wouldn't catch the wind like that. And so, like I learned how to winterize a teepee and a yurt and a tarpie, and so yeah, it's definitely like a lot of different things I've learned over the years. But yeah, it was cold there. And but it was really cool though is being able to see all the different people from all around the world that were there. And like when I remember when you would first get there, you would just see they called it Flag Ave, where people had put all their different flags from all the different countries. And I don't know, it just I remember it feeling like it was kind of like a like really casual, not casual, but um like almost like United Nations kind of meeting with just so many different people from all the world there. And like it was really cool to just go there and be like, "Oh, I'm hungry. I think I'm gonna go hit up the California kitchen because they really like to use their vegetables over there, and they like their Southwest food. So I'm gonna go get something like that now." And oh, like this camp over here has some good food going on. I'm gonna go sit with them for a bit. And oh, look, stop. This one has coffee. Oh, yeah, I was looking for some good coffee. I'm gonna stop and have a coffee here. And it was funny. I did see that sign. It was like a plate, a red plate, and it said, "Stop. We have coffee." And I was like, I'm gonna go check this one out. And I introduced myself, and the guy I was talking to later, I found out he was one of my relatives, and so from Montana. And so, um, yeah, it was nice to meet people like that. But I remember seeing people that I knew from Seattle and Vancouver and other places I've traveled there too. And so, yeah, I made a lot of friends, but I got to see a lot of my friends down there too, which was really cool experience. And um but yeah, I remember talking with one of my friends more recently. She was visiting me in Vancouver from Arizona. Well, she was there with her film, and then she realized I was there and we caught up. But she was telling me, remember when you went viral at Standing Rock and you live streamed Shailene's Woodley's death, or Woodley's live stream her arrest, and that you helped blow up the numbers that of people that were going there. And I was like, "Oh, did I?" And she's like, "Yeah, don't you remember that happening?" And I'm like, "Oh, I guess I did do that, huh?" And so, but yeah, like I remember at one point, because I was doing live streaming on my camera, on my cell phone, but also on my DSLR. And so I was recording on two cameras at the same time usually. And so a little tricky, but it's kind of become one more like a little bit of like my signature moves at this time. Is like I had one of my first youth film mentors. I saw him when I was down there at Standing Rock, and he was there filming too. And then it's funny because I was like masked up like other people were down there, and he knew it was me because he saw me with two cameras. I ran into my cousin there, and I went up to him, and he didn't recognize me when I was masked up, and he was like, "Get out of my face!" And I was like, "It's your cousin," and he's like, "Oh." But I thought it was funny that my teacher recognized me because I had two cameras. So there's a few different filmmakers that I met when I was down there. And so I've always shared footage that I've accumulated with people down there. And then over my travels, I've met people who they've also wanted some of that footage. And so I've shared it with other filmmakers too and artists. And um, so now my footage has gotten into a few different documentaries and like a music video now too, even, or a couple different music videos it's going into. Um, there's one documentary it played at in Sundance, in like 20, was it 2018 or 2019? I think it was 2018, but um, so it played in the Agijata documentary, The Battle of Standing Rock, and then it also is in the Sihasin music video called Strong Together. They have other like protest videos in that music video, but they're like some of the images from Standing Rock are projected over them. So any of those images from Standing Rock are from me. And then there's a new music video that I shot last December, and we're incorporating some of that footage into the music video now. I'm not the one editing it though, but I'm not as keen on editing because I don't have a setup for it. Because as a person in production, I've been prioritizing production gear, and so I love to work with editors and sound people, but I don't do those services myself normally, just because I haven't been investing in that setup. As a cinematographer and director of photography, I've been investing in camera gear and lights and that like that kind of thing. And so production gear. And so um but I'm hoping in time I can get some funds together to go shoot some interviews and kind of do like a little bit of a retrospective looking back on this footage and interview some of the people that I met there and like check in with them on like how they're doing and like their experience of what it was like there, but also what are they up to now and those kinds of things. And I think that would be a really valuable thing to do. But also I'm not necessarily looking for like funding for it from outside like formal funding, so to say, because something I've seen and seen others experience and experienced myself is sometimes when funding gets involved, people are like, oh, you said this one thing we don't like or aren't as fond of, and one of our sponsors or funders or somebody with the money bags isn't going to be as keen on that, and so can you please take that out or edit it or blah blah blah. And I don't want to do anything like that. And so I just want the story to come from me and the people that I'm interviewing as it is and without those kinds of editings into it because I want it to feel like a truly reflective experience. And I don't want to worry about upsetting some oil company or some blah, blah, blah funder. And so I don't know, but that's me. I'm very adamant about integrity for voice.
And it's the indigenous storytelling from the indigenous perspective. That is what our sector really is based on. When you look at indigenous media sector, how do we tell our own stories? What is included? And I wondered about that with all the people you've interviewed. Do you find that there are cultural differences depending on which nation you're talking to?
Yeah, well, I've heard different things. Like I just I don't know. Like I don't want to paint indigenous people with too broad of a brush because like even the word indigenous is it kind of identifies us, but it kind of doesn't. And so like that's why I'm always like curious to hear exactly where someone identifies as being from because like I don't want to like project my idea of what their identity is. I'd rather hear it authentically from them. And so but it's it's a journey for sure trying to just get that authentic voice out there. And but like kind of like I was saying earlier, I know we're different, but I know we have a lot of the similarities too. And so that's kind of the relationship I like to explore.
Exactly. And I know it has been a journey. I remember, um, like in my community, still the old people still refer to themselves as Indian. Like that cousin who said, an Indian's never stuck. Um, and yet, I remember when it was people went with Native, and then it was Aboriginal, and then it became Indigenous. And you wonder, like, I mean, it's always best to identify the nation, but in some cases, especially if you're talking about national funding or if you're talking about, um, issues that affect more than one nation, uh, and that's not even including the Métis or the Inuit, because that's a different, uh, those are different nations altogether, and different ways of telling story, and that's what I'm curious about. Um, you know, I know in New Zealand and Australia and the Maori, they never mention the name of someone who's passed. and there's always a disclaimer, like they don't like showing photographs of people who have passed. We don't have that particular protocol, like in my community. But I'm wondering, I guess I guess I'm kind of looking at different protocols of storytelling, if there are any that have that you've noticed in your travels.
So my mom grew up in a Catholic orphanage, and I grew up here in Seattle, away from a lot of my people, unfortunately, but around some aunties and uncles who share with me what they can, and so I'm learning a lot as an adult for sure, and meeting a lot of family as an adult. My mom was raised in an orphanage, but she's always known who her parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and cousins are. And so, but um, she grew up in Spokane, away from her family, because like it's a bit of a journey. And so, anyways, um, she one of the things that I've learned over the years is kind of like over here on the coast, like closer, like it's within like Quw'utsun and Saanich for sure, but I know it's like other like area tribes too around us where if someone's passed away, you put their pictures away for a year. Um and you might even cover your mirrors right after it happened and that kind of thing. And um, you can still talk about them, but it's mostly about not showing their image. And so, like, as a filmmaker, that's always something I'm trying to be informed about and be respectful to. And so, um, it's like something that, like, as a filmmaker, I try and let people know. As a camera person, I think knowing when to film and knowing when not to film are really big things because um like there's certain songs and ceremonies and just different times that it's the most respectful thing to just put the camera down away, turn it off, and maybe even put like an object like a scarf or like a hat over the camera so people know you're not filming, like and like you're not getting any usable shot at all because like you put the lens cap back on and the camera's off and away. And so um like that kind of respect goes a big way, like towards people, like seeing that like you're respectful to like their ceremonies and traditions. um because I know there's certain times where I've been like at a powwow where there's a certain song that comes on and like I can hear the MC saying, "Put your cameras away," and then you look over and you see someone who's not native still filming, and you're just like everyone's giving them like the stink eye and like, "Hey, can you put that away?" And they're like, "Well, I don't see why." And it's just like it doesn't matter. You have to. And so like yeah, and that's always unfortunate, but yeah, it's respectful. It's like if you're gonna be entering into a community that isn't your own, you should act with some humility, like please. And I see a lot of outsiders coming into our communities and imposing on us and their beliefs when actually it's like should be the other way around a little bit. Like maybe you don't have to believe the belief, but you can respect that that's how people are conducting themselves in this space and area.
Exactly. And that's, yeah, I found that too, that it seems to be there's this other imposition. There's this imposition that comes from the mainstream that we we don't like we don't impose our beliefs on other people. We ask for respect for that. I've seen that too so many times. I've seen people shooting even when they've been asked not to, or just not understanding that, like, we don't have so much about, um, in my community, um, it's about stories, and you can be gifted a story so that you can tell that story, but you can't, um, like I've been gifted some stories that I can tell, but, and so I've told them in a school setting. And I've had teachers come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, that was a lovely creation story. Do you mind writing it down so I can have my students make puppets?" And I'm no. I'm sorry, but no. Um, you can't just make puppets out of a creation story. If you want to have an elder come in, if you want to have them work with the kids, have them really understand the sacredness of that story, that's something else. But yeah, it's that idea. It's the idea that our stories are sacred, and that they need to be respected, and they need to be it's not that's the whole thing with the copyright too. I'm sort of moving off onto a different topic now, but when you look at like your own images and your own work, that's one thing. But when it's some families are I have a friend, I always tell the story about this friend of mine who um, when it became evident she was an artist, her family said, okay, this is your clan, these are your images. You don't use like stylized images of the clan. You don't use other people's images, other clans' images. You use this. And now these are your responsibilities. So how you use them. And that they're not just to be picked up by some other artist and run with because that doesn't belong to them. The same with teepees out west. Some of them have images on them. And it's only certain members of certain families who can put those images. So for someone to come along and take a photograph of that and then stick it on a t-shirt and sell it, like that's sacrilege, really. And and so I'm wondering, have you come across that? I mean, it's obviously with your own work and your own imagery, um, that's I guess a personal as opposed to a community. Like it's more it's a person it's your own work as opposed to in some cases these images are not a personal copyright, but a common stewardship, where the community is stewards over these things. Have you come across?
Well, something I encountered a bit more recently, which I think is going to be an interesting conversation that is going to be a little bit ongoing, is the stuff going on with AI and computer dreaming and that kind of thing. Because there was an instance within the past few years where somebody took an artist's design, and it was like West Coast formline design, and they inputted it into this computer dreaming software, and they were trying to incorporate it into the visuals of somebody's like animation. And it just like computers don't know all the intricacies and all the nuance of what all those symbols mean. And so like there's a lot of meaning there, and if you don't know the meaning behind the symbols of what you're putting out there, it's like you don't know what you could be creating. And so that's kind of like, I had one of my aunts saying that like all those different ovoids and all the swooshes and all those different things, they didn't mean things. And so if the computer is just creating them, she's saying like you could be opening up a can of worms with that. And so I remember like that animation group, they were really keen on, oh, we think your behind the scenes should have this look stylized into your look. And I was like, this kind of feels like cultural appropriation. Or I was like, I don't know how to describe how this feels, but it doesn't feel like this is what we should be doing. And so it was really hard to articulate. But when I looked at, and like as a Coast Salish woman, when I looked at those imagery with the ovoids, and it was like it looked so garbled and unlike itself, and it made me feel like woozy and nauseous to look at it. And I was like, I don't even want to stare at it. Like I was like, this is, and I sent some screenshots to some other like West Coast artists, and I was like, how does this make you feel? And they're like, it makes me, I feel literally feel sick to my stomach. And they were like, I feel like I'm gonna throw up. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. And I'm like, I don't know how to articulate that to these people without saying those words, but I feel like I need to say those words. And so I don't know, but I was just like, also, I was like, does this artist know that you took their image and inputted it into this computer dreaming software? Because that doesn't seem right either. Like, that artist should know.
Absolutely. Computer dreaming. I've never heard it put that way before. Kind of scary, actually.
It's some newer tech for sure, and so, like, that's why I think it's gonna be, like, an ongoing conversation, but it's like what you were saying about the teepees, like, there's certain designs where it's like, it means, like, if you stop here, you will be fed, but if people are just putting that on their teepee, it's like they don't know what message they're sending out to other people. They're gonna be wondering why people are stopping at their teepee wanting to be fed, like
Better get the bannock on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they don't know, but if they just, oh, I saw this and I just liked the aesthetic of how those lines looked on the teepee or whatever. It's like, or the design, I just thought it was pretty or I liked it, and they don't realize what message they're putting out there into the world and the universe and how we understand that and perceive that message. It's just the whole thing about semiotics. What message are you sending to the world? Oh, and then there was another thing I wanted to mention. So, you were asking earlier about like what's kind of different about working with like non-native people or other organizations and then working with native people. I was working on the Quw'utsun sweater documentary like last year, and most of the crew was Quw'utsun, and so that was really cool. Because it was funny. Initially, we thought we all weren't related, and then we were sitting with one of the elders, and they were like, "You're related. You're related. You're related. You're related. You're related. You're all related." And we're like, 'cause they thought it was funny. They were like, "Oh, you guys think you're not related? Oh no, you're all related." And
Oh no, you're my cousin.
yeah, and so I was like, "Oh, okay." So we started out coworkers and left cousins, which doesn't usually happen at other work sites. Not saying it couldn't, but it was very resounding on that documentary. But also, something that we did as a crew, which I found especially poignant and like important, was we introduced ourselves to the community. We had, before we did any filming, we had an event like celebrating the couch and sweater and couch and knitting and couch and people. So then we had people come to the gym in Quw'utsun and um, bring their knitting, and if they wanted to sell their knitting, it was a chance for them to vend and sell. But also for like, if they wanted, we could capture it for our documentary to be shown to the world. And so that was a really cool and good event to do, but to celebrate. But also what we were doing was we were doing door prizes to get people to come, but also um we introduced ourselves to the community and said who we are in relation to the community, who our family is in relation to the community, and we asked some known elders to come up um and ask them permission for, can we tell this story? Do you give us permission? And that elder said in front of the community, yes, I give you permission. And so that was big, because if anyone's seen us in the community, like that also let them know, like, hey, if you want to help us out, like you can, or if you want to be in the documentary, let us know. But also, like, if people seen us filming at a park or like down the road or whatever, like they would know that like we had permission from one of the elders, so it wouldn't, it's not really like they could say we couldn't do what we were doing. But we're always trying to do things in a respectful way, but it just allowed us to feel good about us doing the work that we were doing. And so even before we started production on that, we went to the river and took a spirit bath. And so it's just like we wanted to be able to know we were going in a good way into production. And so it was those kinds of things that were very different from the other crews that I've been involved with. There was a different crew I worked with where it was an Indigenous story, but some of the crew was Native, but some of the department heads were not. And so there was a point where, um, like, one of the department heads was yelling at an elder who was an extra that they were going to eat last. And as a native person, I'm like, that just, I'm like, no, you don't do that. Like I know, like as a person who works in film, I understand why extras should eat last. But if we're going into a community as outsiders to that community, and I'm not from that community, I like it's still, I'm like embarrassed to hear that that person was conducting themselves in that way. And so we had to pause production so that some of our crew could go and apologize to this elder and make it better. But it's just like, yeah, we know that there's industry standard ways of doing things, but also if you're working with an Indigenous community in that community, away from your community, representing yourself as a person not from that community, you should be acting with a lot of humility and graciousness and like respect. And that's just something that didn't happen that day. And that's unfortunate. But also, like, that's part of the reason why when I'm working with crews, I really try and have at least native heads of department if I can't have an entire native crew. Because I find that mentality, it can really mess with um, your crew because, like, if your heads of your department are native and keeping everyone in line, then I don't know, it's a better way to be when you're entering someone else's community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're working with any elder from anywhere, whether you're on res or not, like that, the elders eat first. It doesn't like that's just the way it is. Like, whether they're extras or whether they're, just there on set as consult, like whoever, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, absolutely. See, that's the kind of approach and the cultural differences that really need to be, people need to be aware of that kind of thing. I know some, like Imagine Native, put out a document about working with the Indigenous community. I know CARFAC was working on one, um, and some of the other orgs like the ISO, the Indigenous Screen Office, like they've adopted some of these documents so that people are more aware. But that's exactly the kind of thing that, especially if they're not Indigenous and they're working on a story or anything to do with Indigenous community, they need to.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm hoping that like more like native directors will hire like actual native cinematographers and director photographies. But unfortunately, the way film funding works is with funding, like even if it's an independent, I put that in air quotes because they still have to hire the camera union. And I'm like, how is it independent and you have to hire the camera union? I don't understand that. And I mean, I guess there's quality control to be considered with grant funding, but whatever. But also, isn't that the point? Is like you want to nurture your emerging artists so that they can grow, and it just seems like the way that things are currently set up, it's stunting us. Like, because I think that there should be more things out there to incentivize hiring native directors of photography and cinematographers. But unfortunately, on a lot of the bigger productions, like it's usually not a native cinematographer, which is unfortunate because I find that um like as a native cinematographer, I have a lot of like value that I bring to the table just being a native person and so formally trained.
Exactly. And I know even with in Canada, if you're getting tax credit, then your people have to be from that province, like depending on which province you're. So, and sometimes it doesn't lend itself. Like in Western Canada, um, it's a little bit easier. But if you're working in the East Coast, trying to find a native crew, like it's tough. It really is because there aren't, and where do you find them and how do you find them?
Yeah. Well, and then even something that I'm experiencing, which not a lot of people know about or even think about, but um, as someone who is so called First Nations and Native American, I receive a lot of bias because people think I'm Canadian. I'm actually not. Technically a US citizen with a US passport and a Washington state birth certificate and like all that. But for some reason, like, I went to film school in Vancouver, and so like after graduating, I got a lot of different people wanting to hire me for my camera work, and so I just kind of hung around there. But now I find that if I'm trying to like get my films that I've worked on into the States, that people are biased against me because I'm First Nations or they think I'm Canadian. And I've actually heard people say things like, like I've heard jurists at different arts organizations in the States say, like, it's up to us as Native Americans to uplift Native American artists and storytellers, because those First Nations get all the funding, they get all the arts grants, they get all our jobs, they take our jobs. And so I'm like, oh no, you guys have this take our jobs mentality. Don't you realize that's the pretendians taking our jobs? Don't you realize that's the pretendians taking our scholarships and our arts funds and our opportunities and the press and the awards and everything? It's the pretendians, but no, you're mad at First Nations. And it's crabs in a bucket mentality. It's colonized mentality. It's stunting us, actually, because there's a lot of really cool First Nations films that won't get seen because something that maybe wasn't as great as it got an award, and now, like, people won't see it, and now that film that got the award is going to be what people go and see and watch, and then that's what they think is what we can do as our potential, when really our potential is so much higher and so much greater. But we're stunting ourselves as an industry with that thinking, which is so unfortunate. But I'm gonna keep calling it out because I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. I didn't cross the border. The border crossed us. Like, I'm Siksika that is on so-called both sides of the line. I'm Wsanec, and our traditional territory does go on both sides of the line. I'm Quw'utsun, our traditional territory goes on both sides that so-called line. And I'm Aaniiih and Nakoda, which is on both sides of that so-called line. So I find it very small-minded thinking, colonized thinking, for people to try and, like, discriminate against First Nations in the arts, when really we could be so much better if we all work together and put our minds together. And, like, I'm hopeful. So what I'm doing is I'm choosing to celebrate the people who are happy and excited and keen to work with me, and the people who appreciate the diverse perspective I bring to the table.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's the kind of attitude we need to get beyond the situation as it stands now. Yeah, that idea of, uh, you know, uh, um, policing, um, that, yeah, that First Nations are taking this take my job mentality. I get tired. So I'm really glad to hear someone who's optimistic.
I'm trying. It's not easy, not by any means. Sometimes I feel a little, like, crazy for doing the same thing and expecting a different result, but I just think that if I keep spreading awareness to it, people will shift their perspective. Because I've heard people say things like, and I don't agree with this opinion, but I've heard it, is that they don't think Hawaiians are considered Native American. However, I disagree. I don't agree with that opinion, but I've heard it. But I've heard people who are Hawaiian not be so keen on wanting to support me as a filmmaker because I'm First Nations. And I'm like, people would say you're not Native American too. And they're like, they make a face. And I'm like, yeah, that's the same face I make when people say I'm not really, like, Indigenous to America too. Yeah. But what they keep coming back to is, I live in Canada, I work in Canada, I receive Canadian arts funding, therefore I'm Canadian. And I'm like, no, you don't get to tell me who I am. I'm not Canadian. And, like, I'm like, also, Canada's not real, but also I'm not Canadian. Like, the Canadian Border Patrol, like, they always heavily scrutinize me. They have outright told me I am not Canadian. They tell me that me having a First Nation status card does not make me Canadian. It means I'm entitled to benefits. So, therefore, I am not Canadian. So, but it's wild that I get so-called, like, discriminated against the arts. There was that really cool film that I produced years ago, Red Girl's Reasoning, and there was film festivals that maybe they played it, but they didn't want it to win. And I remember there was one place that played where it was in the running for best of the category, and it didn't win because um, they wanted. I remember hearing that the judge had slept with the person that had won. From her mouth herself, I heard her say that. But I think she thought I was Native American, so I think she felt comfortable saying it because um, after I realized I was getting discriminated against for being First Nations and or Canadian, I started really heavily emphasizing I'm from Seattle. Yeah, like when I come back to the States, the Border Patrol is always like, welcome home. And so I don't know, I didn't cross the border, but I just wish that we could stop focusing on this arbitrary line and focus on more unity. Like something that I found very inspiring being at Standing Rock was hearing about like the eagle and condor prophecy and like the unity that could come from that. And I'm like, where is it? I want to see it. I want to be a part of that. And it's just unfortunate that not everyone has that mentality.
Well, I mean, there's been this environment of scarcity that was deliberately created. It's part of the genocidal culture on both governments, both federal governments. So, people are have that mindset because they think that there's only scraps and you can only fight over this, as opposed to let's do this ourselves. And there's there's more than enough for everyone. We just need to work together. And that's why it's Turtle Island, not, Turtle half a part of it over here.
Well, it's like every once in a while I'll get people who ask me, well, Rose, if you could only pick one side of the border, what side would you pick? And even when the border was shut down during the pandemic and most of everyone could not get across the border, I could still get across the border. But it's like when I think of the land, I think of it as a body and I can't exist with only a part of that. I it's like sectioning off part of a body and being like, "Oh, do you only want like the head and the arm or do you only want the foot and the leg or like just the stomach only?" It's just like, "No, I want the whole thing." It's like I am from that land. Just like how come I have to pick a side? And I am from there. I don't it doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. And maybe, with more films like yours, um, and other filmmakers, and, once we start really growing into our own, it'll become normalized. That's what I always say about, excuse me, about the TRC. We have to focus on truth. And once the truth has been normalized within society, then reconciliation will happen as naturally. It'll be organic. It'll be an outcome. But first, we have to normalize the truth, and I think that's going to take a long time. I mean, you're starting to see it a little bit in the schools, but it's got to be integrated into everything in order for, we're looking at least another generation or two.
Oh, for sure. It's a lot of work to go. But yeah, that's why I don't know. There's even though film can be difficult, I persist despite that because I feel the truth is so important and I just, as an artist, like that was something that they really instilled within me, like at university, is the role of the artist and how it is to reflect ourselves back to ourselves. And it could be through film, but it could be a painting, it could be a picture drawn on crayons or watercolors, it could be a pastel, it could be like knitted, it could be like silk screened or lino cut. It could be so many different things or all of those things. It could be an animation, like it could be beads on a table, like moving, like it could be so many different things. And like what I appreciate about it though is that sometimes even if there isn't like words, a feeling can come through and that can be the most truthful thing.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And I want to thank you. It's Humigrich. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I feel like I've learned a lot. I feel inspired.
Aw.
I want to go, do something artsy.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You know? And and with anyone, what you're saying will continue to grow and continue to happen. So continue, but thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us
Oh, thank
today
you.
and to talk to me and
Thank
um,
you.
continue, Rich. Thank you.
Ishkasiyam.